Hello guys and welcome. Today I'll be showing you a guide of how to do Darkheart Thicket on Mythic Plus difficulty. The goal of this guide is to give you a good idea of what the dungeon looks like, which mobs to pull, which mobs to leave alone, and generally how you want to reach the 100% completion bonus before you reach the last boss. The affixes we have this week are Teeming and Skittish. Teeming puts more mobs in the instance than what there normally is, and Skittish makes the tank generate way less threat. Teeming is thankfully a quite easy mechanic, because even though there are a couple of extra mobs in some of the packs, it doesn't actually increase the overall power of each of the mobs the same way that other affixes like Bolstering does. So as long as you're aware of the abilities of the different mobs, then you shouldn't really have a big problem finishing the dungeon. When dealing with Skittish, it's very important that you have the correct group setup in your group to make it easier, because if you have the wrong one, chances are that you'll lose people to over aggroing quite a lot. I do think discussions about which classes and which group setups are most ideal for Mythic Plus is a very large topic, and for that reason I will for the most part leave it out of this video. However, I will say that you generally want to build your groups with a strong bias towards ranged DPS rather than melee, and that you want to bring at least one, but preferably two classes that can help with threat generation. And by threat generation I very specifically mean Hunters and Rogues for misdirection and tricks of the trade. And in the unfortunate event that you find yourself doing Skittish with multiple melee and god forbid free melee without any classes to help with threat generation, then I wish you the best of luck, because it's just not a very fun experience. But before we begin, I just want to note that I'll include a completion percentage bar for both Teeming and for normal mode, so you can see the difference and you can use the guide for normal mode. And on top of that, I'll show how much each of the packs are worth in percentage for each of the modes, but just keep in mind that the percentages aren't always exact even numbers, they're odd numbers. So when you plan out your run, then ideally you want to maybe plan for 101, 102%, just to avoid getting screwed by odd numbers. A very helpful piece of information though is that the run on both Teeming and normal mode will always amount to 117% completion if you kill all the mobs that are directly in your way. It is technically possible to skip some of the packs with clever stealth or clever saps, but on Teeming it's a little bit harder to skip because there's more mobs that are physically blocking your way. So for the ease of the guide and for the ease of the play, then we'll just assume that you kind of have to clear out the packs that you could maybe skip if you were a bit clever with your abilities. It also leads quite nicely into the debate about where you want to use invisibility potions. Knowing that you can skip 17% somewhere, I'll definitely show examples of where I think is the best in this guide, but if you have other packs that you wish to skip for whatever reason, be it affixes, be it group setup, be it speed, be it difficulty, then feel free. There's no one forcing you to take exactly the ones that I'm suggesting. Well then, let us begin. The first pack you'll encounter has 3 Frenzied Nightclaws, which are the Panther models, and 1 Dreadsoul Poisoner, which is the Spider model. Now, immediately following this pack there is a second pack which has 3 Mind-Shattered Screechers, which are the Bird models, and then another Dreadsoul Poisoner. Now, I strongly recommend you pull these packs together, because they are quite easy to deal with as long as you control them. Controlling these packs largely comes down to breaking up the burst damage from the Panthers, because roughly 5 to 6 seconds after you pull them, and periodically after that, they'll leap at a random party member, dealing large amounts of damage to them. So the way that you prevent them from killing someone is that you let 1 or 2 of them jump, and then you stun the remaining Panthers that haven't jumped yet. Because this way you make sure your healer has time in between the jumps to heal up the people that are taking damage. The other dangerous ability in these packs comes from the Dreadsoul Poisoner, which will periodically cast a spell called Nightmare Toxin on a random party member, which will inflict a 6-second dot on them that when it is dispelled or it expires, the player will explode in a poison nova, dealing damage to anyone standing near him. So the way that you deal with this is that you make sure that the players that are afflicted with the poison simply moves away from the rest of their group to avoid any AoE damage. The final ability you have to be mindful of when pulling these packs comes from the Mind-Shattered Screechers. The Screechers will frequently cast a spell called Unnerving Screech, which will target a random player and disorient them for 4 seconds. Now, the disorient works the same way as the Seagulls works in Eye of Ashara for anyone familiar with that, where you'll simply walk in place, but you won't count on the aggro table as a tank, which means that if your tank gets hit by this, then the mobs will simply not hit the tank, they'll go for everyone else, which kinda makes everything a mess. So make sure you have people assigned to kicks, make sure you have a Either a mild stun rotation, even though you are using the stun on the Panthers, or a silence rotation where you bring along things like Blood Elf racial silences, Moonkin silences, anything like that. But if you are in a position where your group does not have a high amount of damage and does not have multiple silences or can overlap the stuns with the Panthers, then just pull the packs one at a time, because you can actually have a lot of deaths if the tank gets disoriented. I thought now would be a good time to include an example of how it might look when DPS doesn't quite deal with Skittish the way that you should. In this example, the tank decides to pull multiple packs of mobs, but the mage opens up with large AoE burst spells on the first pack before the packs are grouped up together, and what happens is he draws aggro from the tank, and it really becomes quite a nightmare trying to group everything together again. A good piece of advice for DPS dealing with Skittish is that when your tank pulls multiple groups of mobs, it's a good idea to hold on to your large AoE spells until the mobs are relatively grouped up and the tank has had a couple of globals to generate threat on them. It is for sure easier to keep aggro on the mobs you already have under control, because you can spend your global taking the mobs back that are dropping aggro on you, but it is much harder to pick up aggro and then keep the mobs, because you spend your abilities and your globals picking up the aggro rather than maintaining it. And as a final note on Skittish, it is often a better idea to focus your DPS on the mobs that are grouped up on the tank rather than the mobs that are loose, because it simply is harder for the tank to generate threat on the mobs that are far away, and even if they taunt the mob, they don't actually generate more threat than the taunt gives, so if you keep shooting at the mobs, they'll just come back to you once the taunt wears off. Next up are either 2 Festahide Grizzlies, which are the bear models, or 4 Dreadsoul Ruiners, which are the caster models. Now, the reason this can vary is because the casters are a patrol that sometimes goes in front of the bears and sometimes goes behind. Now, a big part of doing Darkheart Thicket is that you know the patrol paths, because there definitely are a decent amount of patrols where your pulls will vary a little bit from run to run, just depending on which packs are standing there first, which packs are close, and in a lot of cases you want to pull preferably 2 packs together, but if you can't get 2 or you can't handle 2, you just do them one by one. Now, the bears are the only pack that can be tough to deal with if you pull them with other packs, simply because they have an ability called Maddening Roar, which they will occasionally cast, and the ability will deal damage to anyone within 30 yards range, and it will stack up. The more roars you're hit by, the more damage you'll take. So on higher difficulty, a player can realistically take 2, maybe 3 roars before they die, and then considering you have 2 bears at a time, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you get hit by the second set of roars, then you'll probably die. They do also have an ability called Spew Corruption, which will spawn small patches of corruption on the ground, from which small ants will spawn. Now, the little ants can be slowed and stunned, and they'll simply fixate a target and just chase them and hit them in melee. They don't deal a particularly high amount of damage, but just be careful you don't get hit by them, because they can actually spawn both in front and behind of your group. And also, when you are kiting the ants, just be careful you don't run in front of the bears, because they do actually cleave and you'll get wrecked. The other pack you can encounter in this area is the Dreadsoul Ruiners Patrol. Now, the Dreadsoul Ruiners are primarily casters, and they have 2 spells. One is called Despair, which is a 2% healing debuff, and a small dot, which is cast on the target that has aggro. And the spell does add a stacking debuff, which can be dispelled, so once you get near 10 stacks, it's probably a good idea to have your healer dispel you. The other spell they have is called Star Shower, which causes beams of energy to rain from the sky, and they create a little swirling circle on the ground that you have to dodge. Now, it does create quite a lot of circles, and they do hit quite hard. So I strongly recommend that you focus your kicks entirely on the Star Showers and let all the Despairs go through, because the Despair spell is not particularly strong, and it's probably relative or weaker than just melee hits from the mobs, so just kick the Star Showers and let the Despairs go through. The last pack in this area of the dungeon is 2 Crazed Razorbeaks, which are the Hippogriff models, and another Dreadsoul Ruiner. The Hippogriffs are very easy. They only have one ability, which is called Propelling Charge, which is an uninterruptible but stunnable cast that just makes the Hippogriff charge and stun any target it hits for 2 seconds. But they will turn in the direction that they're going to charge, so you should have a pretty easy time dodging. Now, this is definitely the easiest pack in the dungeon, and ideally you would want to pull the bears alone and then pull the casters with the Hippogriff, but it depends a lot on the caster patrol paths. After you kill the Razorbeaks, you jump up on the rocks and drop down to the next part of the dungeon. Now, you can't go through the hole in the wall, because if you do, you'll aggro the pack that's standing near it. As you drop down, you'll be faced with packs on your immediate left and immediate right that you want to avoid. The two packs that you're interested in clearing to get past this part of the dungeon is the first patrol, which consists of 2 Frenzied Nightclaws and a Dreadsoul Poisoner. And then later down the hallway, you'll find another pack of 2 mobs, which will consist of any combination of Dreadsoul Ruiners and Dreadsoul Poisoners. The first patrol will patrol between the point where you drop down and about halfway down the corridor, where the other patrol will patrol from the halfway point to the other end of the corridor. So if you are lucky, they'll both be around the center once you drop down, so you can pull them together. If not, then you'll kind of have to work a little bit to pull them together. The clip I'm showing right now, we kind of have to work to get them together. If you're very unlucky that the first patrol is right near the point where you drop down, you probably want to pull them back into the corner where you drop down and just kill them, so you don't have to kill them in the middle of the room between the 2 other packs. If you are a DPS, you do want to be very careful with your AoE attacks here, because you are surrounded by mobs on both sides, and you can very easily risk pulling one of them, which is almost a guaranteed wipe on higher difficulties. And the mobs do have a lot of abilities that can manipulate your positioning, such as the Star Shower from the Dreadsoul Ruiners or Nightmare Toxin from the Dreadsoul Poisoners. Because there is such a high chance of aggroing another pack, I generally recommend that you try and follow your tank a little bit further down the corridor, like maybe somewhere past the halfway point, and you kill the mobs there. For these packs, your DPS priority order should always be the Frenzied Nightclaws first, then the Dreadsoul Poisoners, and then Dreadsoul Ruiners last, while you kick the Star Showers from the Dreadsoul Ruiners, but you let the Despairs go through as previously mentioned. After you're done with the patrols, you'll find 2 bears at the end of the corridor. They're the same as the bears we previously encountered. The only thing you want to be mindful of is to have your tank walk all the way up to the green wall before the boss. And the reason for that is that there's a very small RP event before the boss room opens that you can trigger by walking close. Now, it doesn't save you a ton of time, but on the other hand, it doesn't really cost you anything to just move there either. When you are doing the bears on Skittish, it can sometimes be a good idea to mark one of them as the primary target, just to avoid having them drop aggro and turn around, because they do cleave and it sometimes gets a little messy. After you're done with the bears, you move on to the first boss. And as per usual, I'm going to skip the boss in this video because I'd like to focus time on how to deal with the trash rather than the bosses. Coming up after the boss is the part of the dungeon where I think most groups are likely to go wrong in terms of which mobs they kill and which mobs they skip. There are 2 main reasons as to why this part of the dungeon might be confusing. The first one is that the Vilethorn Blossoms, which are the flower models, are worth roughly 3% each, which is quite a lot. Because that means you ideally want to kill as many of them as possible for fast and easy percentages. The downside is that the flowers are often grouped with other mobs that takes quite a long time to kill or are quite hard to deal with. The second reason is that one of the packs you normally skip without the teaming affix has more mobs in it that are physically standing in your way, which makes it a lot harder to skip. Now you can technically do it with some timing or with multiple classes that can CC, but for groups that aren't well organized, or for groups that doesn't have the right classes, I kind of recommend that you just kill it because it's easier, and then you skip something else instead that doesn't require as much finesse. The pack that I'm talking about is the pack that we're pulling in the video just now. Now the reason why you normally skip it is because it has multiple Rotheart Keepers in it. The Rotheart Keepers have an ability called Vile Mushroom. Vile Mushroom spawns large green mushrooms at the feet of random party members, and the mushrooms will deal a large amount of damage to any player that stood in them, and will also heal the Vilethorn Blossoms for a quite significant amount. This means that any time you pull Keepers with Vilethorn Blossoms, you essentially have to burn down 2 full hit point bars, 1 for the Keepers and then 1 for the flowers afterwards, because they'll be full health from the mushrooms. For that reason, you can sometimes pull the Vilethorn Blossoms from one pack to the next without killing them, simply because they'll heal to full on the Keepers and are not particularly hard to deal with. The only ability that the Vilethorn Blossoms have, in addition to being normal melee mobs, is called Root Burst. Root Burst spawns a small brown swirling circle on their player, which will explode and deal damage to anyone standing in it. So simply move out of the way, and you shouldn't have a very big problem with them. The combination of Vile Mushroom and Root Burst does however mean you have to move around quite a lot, and you probably want to move the mobs backwards instead of forwards so you don't end up running out of space and pulling another pack by mistake. The last type of mobs in these packs that I haven't talked about yet are the Rotheart Dryads. Now the Dryads will throw javelins at random party members, which deals a pretty significant amount of damage, and it will target people that aren't a tank. This makes them a relatively high priority target, but still less important than the Keepers, just because the Keepers manipulate your movement so much, and that as long as the Keepers are alive, any DPS you do to the Wildthorn Blossoms is just wasted. So generally for a DPS, I strongly recommend that you open with high single target on the Rotheart Keepers, and you focus them down, because any cleave you do on the Blossoms just doesn't matter. So you go Keepers first, then you kill the Dryads second, because if the Dryads jumps near other packs, it just makes it hard to DPS them, and you kind of want to get rid of them early on. And then once both the Keepers and the Dryads are dead, you cleave down the Blossoms. After killing off these two packs, you get to the part of the dungeon where you probably want to whip out your invisibility potions. If you recall what I said at the start of the run, the entire dungeon has 117% worth of mobs that are in your way, so ideally we want to skip 17% somewhere. The next two packs takes quite a long time to kill, but they're also close enough that you can get past both of them with one invisibility potion, which makes them a prime candidate for skipping. The first pack we're skipping is a Dryad Patrol that's worth 7% on teaming, and the second pack we're skipping is a double Keeper pack that's worth 8% on teaming, for a total of 15% skipped. It is also possible to follow a strategy that skips the first two packs of the dungeon and the last pack of the dungeon, but it is going to cost you 2 invisibility potions, and keep in mind they have a 10-minute cooldown and forces a 10-minute cooldown on all your potions. So if you do end up using invisibility potions twice, it does mean that you can't use potions for a very large percentage of the dungeon run. I personally prefer to skip the Keeper packs that we're doing right here, but if you want to follow a different strategy, you have the percentages and you can certainly do it. The way that you use invisibility potions is that you just click them, you wait a second for the invisibility to kick in, and then you move past the pack without casting any spells. Because if you cast spells or use abilities, the invisibility will break and the mobs will aggro you. Now you can use speed boosting effects before you use the potion, but just not after. Pretty obvious stuff, but I have seen it gone wrong often enough that I feel like it's worth a mention. If you're doing the dungeon without teaming, I actually recommend that you skip the first pack with Rotheart Keepers that we just killed. The way that you skip it is you CC the Dryad that is patrolling with either things like Sap or Mage Polymorph followed by Invis, but not something that keeps you in combat like a Shaman Hex. Then once the Dryad is CC'd, you jump over the flowers on the right side. The pack is worth 9% on normal mode, which means you can skip another 8% somewhere else. Now after you've gotten over the hurdle of using Invis potions, you'll get to another Dryad patrol that patrols all the way from the Keeper pack into the next pack. So they actually get close enough to the packs at each end that you'll aggro them if you pull them, so just try and grab the Dryad patrol somewhere in between. The pack is quite easy. However, there is a bug that if you have Wildthorn Blossoms from one of the previous packs, once you get about halfway down the corridor, they'll just stop and start evading unless you come back. So if you have mobs from the previous packs, just stop and kill them before you get too far down the corridor. And as mentioned previously, you kill the Dryads first and then the Wildthorn Blossoms second. The next pack you'll encounter is one of the more tricky ones of the dungeon. The pack consists of 5 Nightmare Dwellers that are kind of standing all around the room, so you do have to work a little bit to pull them together. The reason you do this is to group them up so you can use AoE stuns and AoE silences on them. The Nightmare Dwellers have one scary ability, which is called Tormenting Eye. Now Tormenting Eye is an interruptible channel that will deal a moderate amount of damage to a random party member, and if the cast finishes, the party member will be feared for 4 seconds. Obviously this is a quite scary mechanic, so I recommend that you open up with kicks while you group up the mobs, and then you coordinate your group so you use the stuns and silences in succession. Now, you can't really chain stun them unless you have a very high amount of damage, so instead you want to wait until maybe 2 or more of them are casting before you use the stun or the silence. It's completely possible to cleave all of them at the same time, but if your group is a bit low on DPS, you can just kill them one at a time. After you've cleared up the Nightmare Dwellers, you move on to the second boss. After the boss you head north, and the first pack you'll encounter is a pack of Hate-spawn slimes. Now the slimes are melee only, and their only ability is that when they die, after a second they'll burst into a small explosion that damages anyone that's standing very close to them. So as you kill them, just make sure that you don't stand on top of them to avoid the damage. After that are 2 Blood-tainted Furies, which are the large red water elemental models. There is also another pack of the hate spawn slimes that you might pull along with the water elementals, but they are fairly inconsequential as long as you remember to move once they die. The water elementals only have two abilities. One which is called Blood Bomb, which is a red orb that falls from the ceiling, and when it hits the ground, it deals damage to anyone standing close and knocks them back in the direction away from where the orb landed. The other ability is called Blood Charge, and the water elemental will target a random player and begin to cast a charge towards them. Now, you can't kick the charge, but you can stun it to break up the cast. If it finishes, the water elemental will charge towards that player and knock anyone that's hit by it to the side. The reason why getting knocked around is important in this part of the dungeon is because if a player touches the X at the side of the corridor, it will cause hate spawn whelplings to spawn. The whelps don't have any special abilities and they do very low amounts of damage and have very low amounts of health, but if you're not careful you can actually get quite a lot of them. It's not a big problem, but it's not ideal either, so I just advise you to generally avoid it if you can, but if you have to walk in X, just walk in them, it doesn't really matter that much. When the water elementals finally die, they'll spawn 4 new edge which are called Blood Tainted Bursters. The Blood Tainted Bursters have two abilities. One is called Blood Bolt, which will deal damage to a random target, and the other is called Blood Metamorphosis. The Metamorphosis is the only dangerous spell, because if the cast is finished, the Blood Tainted Burster will transform into another Blood Tainted Fury. The only difference is that the new Fury doesn't spawn a pack of Blood Tainted Bursters when it dies, but it still takes a long time to kill and it still retains the same abilities as the normal ones, so you really want to stop every single Blood Metamorphosis from finishing casting. Because of this, the Blood Tainted Bursters should always be your first priority for DPS, with the water elementals being second, the slimes being third, and the whelps being last. When you're done with the water elementals, there's only one tiny bit to go before the third boss. In this area there's another patrolling water elemental that you can skip. Wait for it to be on the left side along the wall and then run in. There is still a pack of hateful slimes, but just aggro them and pull them into the boss room and kill them there. Just make sure that you bring the slimes a bit into the room, because if you fight them right in the doorway, the water elemental that's patrolling outside might still aggro you. When you are running in, it's completely okay to run on the X and pull some extra whelps in order to avoid pulling the water elemental. After clearing up the slimes that followed you into the boss room, you can start the boss. Once you're finished, you drop down into an enclosed corridor, which is the last part of the dungeon. You're also taking a non-zero amount of falling damage when you drop down, so just give your healer a second to pick everyone back up before you go. The first pack you immediately encounter is a patrol of 2 Taint-Heart Summoners and 2 Dreadfire Imps. The Summoners are the large humanoid models and the Imps are, well, the Imps. Everything in this pack is a spellcaster, so you have to be quite selective in what you kick. There are 2 high priority spells and 2 low priority spells. The first high priority spell is called Curse of Isolation and is cast by the Taint-Heart Summoners. Curse of Isolation afflicts one target and will deal damage to anyone standing near the target for 12 seconds. The damage is quite high, so if someone is afflicted with the curse, make sure you're not standing near them. The other high priority spell is called Dread Inferno, which is cast by the Dreadfire Imps. Dread Inferno is cast on a random target and it causes the target to explode and deal damage to anyone nearby after a short amount of time. You can see the Dread Inferno because the person afflicted will have a large orange swirling circle under them, and I recommend that you move away from your group if you're afflicted with the spell because it does hit very hard. You should always try to stop these 2 types of spells from being cast and let every other spell go through. The low priority spells are called Shadow Bolt, which is cast by the Taint-Heart Summoners, and Firebolt, which is cast by the Dreadfire Imps. Shadow Bolt deals a moderate amount of damage but is only aimed at the tank, while Firebolt can target anyone but deals a very low amount of damage. I recommend that you only try to stop these if you already have enough kicks to cover the Curse of Isolation and the Dread Inferno. After you kill this pack, there's an almost identical pack right next to it. The only difference is that one of the Taint-Heart Summoners is replaced by a Taint-Heart Stalker. The Taint-Heart Stalker will occasionally shadow step to one of your group members and deal damage to them, but that's about the only thing it does. It's not particularly scary, but it does summon a low health clone after it shadow steps that you have to get aggro on and that you can kill quite easily. If your group has a large amount of interrupts available, you can do both of these packs at the same time. If not, then just do them one at a time. Next up are 4 Tormented Bloodseekers, which are the bat models. The bats are only melee, but they do have an ability called Dark Soul Drain. Dark Soul Drains is a 15-second debuff that deals a low amount of periodic damage, but it also drains health from the afflicted tank to the bats. There isn't really a lot you can do about it other than outdamage it, but for a DPS there's no AoE damage on this pack, so you don't really have to be careful at all of where you're standing. Just keep in mind that if you're doing this on teaming and the tank is kiting the bats, they might not generate enough threat, so be a little bit careful that the bats don't turn on you if you're very close to them in melee. You ideally want to not use cooldown on these, even though they do hit hard, because the next pack is quite hard and you might want to save the cooldowns for that, or the boss following immediately after. The next pack is the last pack of the dungeon, and probably the hardest one. The reason why it's difficult is because it has a very wide variety of mobs. You have to deal with 1 Taintheart Summoner, 1 Taintheart Deadeye, 2 Taintheart Stalkers, a Tormented Bloodseeker, and a Dreadfire Imp. The most dangerous abilities in this pack is still the Dread Inferno from the Imps and the Curse of Isolation from the Taintheart Summoners. So focus your kicks on these 2 casts specifically and try to focus down the Imp first and then the Summoner second. If you can successfully keep these 2 abilities under control, there's nothing that punishes you for standing close together. Standing close together has multiple benefits. First off, when you're doing teaming, it makes it much easier for the tank to maintain aggro if all the mobs are close together instead of far apart. Secondly, it means whenever a Taintheart Stalker shadow steps to a party member and creates a clone, they're still right there in melee and very easy to both aggro and cleave. After the Summoner and the Imp is dead, you can very easily cleave down the rest of the pack. I recommend using your stuns to help interrupt the casts, or to help prevent someone from dying if the tank drops threat on one of the mobs. I also think this is the perfect pack to skip on normal mode with invisibility potions, because it is the hardest of the dungeon. If your group for some reason doesn't have invisibility potions, you can suicide past the pack by running into the boss room and dying, and then having someone with a combat res or someone with an Ankh of Reincarnation res after the pack resets. Just keep in mind that this costs you 5 seconds per player that dies, plus the time it takes to res. It's probably faster than killing the pack, but it's obviously not optimal. After the pack, you should now be over 100% completion and ready to take on the last boss of the dungeon. So thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. And if you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate if you would let me know, because it really helps to motivate me to continue making the videos. If you want to help me record these dungeon runs, or you just want to come along with me to do the dungeons, then I'll add my battle tag into the description and feel free to add me, guys. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.